Bennett. I wanted to jump on here and just ask a really simple question. Are you stuck in your own story? This is something that I know that I'm working with, as it seems like a lot of my lives lately has been me, things that I'm working with on my own. That's typically how life goes. We have the best advice for other people, but I find that this is something I'm struggling with on my own. There were aspects of my life that I am keenly aware that I told myself a story that is not true, and I've run with it. And I think we all have a tendency to do this. We all have a tendency to, something has happened in our lives, and then we tell a story behind it. And that story it informs how we behave. It informs how we move forward. But in some cases, that story is just not true. And what's deeper about that is that we tend to get around people who reinforce that same story, maybe because they've told themselves the same story about similar experiences in their lives. And so we feel better about ourselves because there's other people that we find ourselves in company with that are like, yep, see, it's the same thing. But I want to challenge you today, as I'm challenging myself. What if the story you've been telling yourself is not even true? What if it didn't even happen the way that you thought it did? So really quickly, I remember that there was a study that was done right after September 11th. They did what was called a study on, it was some people who are memory specialists who seized upon this moment to do something, to do this, really different type of study. And they called September 11th what was called a flashbulb moment, meaning that, it's everybody remembers where they were and everybody remembers that date, particularly if you're in America. And so what they did was they took a group of people and they asked them to write down everything that had happened, where they were, what they were wearing, how they first heard the news, who told them the news, and write everything down. And they wrote it down, I believe it was like 2 days or 3 days after the September 11th had taken place. And then they came back later. And a year later, they had them write down their experience again. Same questions. Where were you and who told you the news and what were you doing? Tell us everything in detail. And then 10 years later, it was three, same group. 10 years later, they had them do the same thing. And what they found when they compared the notes for the same people, they found that though we like to trust our memory is really faulty. Now, everybody that, was there, I'm talking about, that did this study, they all said pretty much the same things. I mean, everybody, the big things had not really so much changed. Well, really, the only big thing was that there was a terrorist attack on this country. But the details as to where people were when they heard it, what they were wearing, and all these other things, the scientists found when they were analyzing the data was that as time went on, people's memories just by and large faded. And I bring this up because we have a tendency to look back in life and we've told ourselves a story and it may not even be true. It may not even be true. And I've come to the place in my life now where I'm more interested in being effective than I am in being right. And I want to explain that because I think sometimes we get so focused on being right and we argue people down because we want to be right. And I've learned you can argue somebody down so much that they're quiet, but just because they're quiet doesn't mean you've won. Just because they're quiet doesn't mean you proved your point. And even if you proved your point, doesn't mean that you're right. And I'm recognizing that about myself at this place in my life because I understand for me to go to another level, there are some things that I have to confront about my past that I've told some stories about. And for some of us, we've told the story for so long, we don't even know the truth versus the story. I don't want to call it a lie because it's not malicious. We didn't create this and concoct this maliciously, but it is a story because it is an untruth. It is something that we built around some experience, maybe because we wanted to protect ourselves, maybe because we just didn't want to go there. There are places in our lives where hurt lives because of things that have happened to us, or perhaps because of choices that we've made. And so we tell ourselves a story to cope with it, to minimize it, to push it away, to dismiss it. And I want to ask you today, are you stuck in your story? Are you so stuck in what you've told yourself? The scripture tells us that the children of Israel wandered, whatever word you want to use, in the wilderness for 40 years because of a story they told themselves, because they told themselves that they weren't strong enough, that they couldn't go into the land that God gave them, that it wasn't enough. They told themselves that Egypt was better. That's what's funny. They fought so long to get up out of Egypt, and Egypt was the worst thing that could have ever happened to them, so they said. And from the moment that they've been delivered, they keep comparing themselves to Egypt. In fact, when they're at the Red Sea, they cry out to Moses, it was better that we stayed in Egypt because at least his grave's there. And then even when they went over in the Red Sea and the whole Pharaoh's army was drowned and they saw the spectacular hand of God in the wilderness and said, this is one of my favorite scriptures. They said, oh, that we had meat to eat and what did they say? Fish and leeks like we had in Egypt, because they were comparing their present experience with their past because of the story that they told. They had begun to tell themselves that the bondage that they were in was better than the deliverance that they were tasting. Isn't that amazing how we do? How we're so fickle as people that we can't wait to get out of something, and then the moment we get out of it, we talk all about it. I know people who all they talked about in prison was getting the hell out of it. And then when they got out, all they did was talk about when I was in my cell, and then I remember the day room, and then I remember the record. And they keep rehearsing the stories, and you almost want to say, I thought you said you hated that place. Why are you spending so much time talking about it? Because it's a story that they've told themselves. It's a story. And the reason why it's important for us to confront the story, and I'm telling something that actually I haven't probably ever really spoken so brazenly about here, but I have people that I see. This is part of my team. People that I see, that's part of my safety net, I'll call it. A therapist to work me through some things in my life. I mean, and one of the things that she is helping me with is the stories that I'm telling myself. And I'm not happy about it. I mean, it's never happy to confront some stuff because, you know, one of the things she said, I know I'm being a bit vulnerable here, is that you always go back to, well, you know, I'm a man and I grew up in Baltimore and I had to be tough. Yeah, but that's a story you told yourself. Who told you that? Not that you lived in Baltimore and that you're black, all that. Okay, that's a fact. But the story I've told myself around it is the reason why I am emotionally disconnected in places, the reason why I dismiss things, the reason why I might smile all the time, you know, hurting inside, is because growing up, I felt like I just had to be that way. But that's the story I told myself. And so I find myself in a place now at 34 years old, dealing with stories that I've told myself since I was 4. That's hard. 30 years of a story, and then somebody wants to stand up there and sit in, you know, in your face and tell you that. What if that story was wrong? What if the thing you've held to so long and you've argued down, what if it was all wrong? What if racism didn't play a part at all in the reason why where you are today? Now, somebody gonna get mad and probably cut me off as I said that. I'm not saying that there's not racism in this country, but what if that's not the predominant thing that has kept you back? Maybe it's your attitude. I mean, maybe it's the fact that people don't hire you because they don't like the way you walk in the room. They don't like this, the fact that you want to keep it real all the time. But we've told ourselves a story. I will admit that I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty of this. I will tell myself a story. When I tell myself a story, I run with it. I don't know about y'all, but I know that's about me. I will tell a story and I will run with it. I will run all the way home. I will 10, 20 years later still be telling that story. There are stories I've told myself about my childhood that just now I've finally gotten to the place where I can say, maybe I was wrong. Not about what actually happened, but about the story I told myself. Well, not about what was really done, but the story. What if that story I told myself is the direct reason and has a direct correlation to why I made choices that I made later in life? That's a hard thing to face. And many of us never get to the next level because we don't want to face that. Many of us never get to the place where God really wants to deliver us because we don't want to change the story. We want to keep doing like the children of Israel. I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough. And it was better when we were in Egypt. Can you imagine the disrespect? That God did all he did to take them out of Egypt. I mean, you talk about a mighty hand. You need to read Exodus again and see the plagues that he wrought on that nation to bring his people out. And all they could say as a point of thanks is, it was better when we were in Egypt. They kept doing it. Remember when Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days and God was trying to change their story and give them a new commandment and give them new laws and give them a new thing. And in the midst of all that, when Moses is up on the mountain, they're down on the backside of the mountain and they are taking their gold off and they're building a calf. Now, most of you may not, it may just, well, it's a golden calf, it's an idol. But remember, the calves are what the Egyptians worship. So now they have traded the God that has delivered them out of bondage for a God with a little g that kept them in bondage. Isn't that deep? And they were worshiping a calf based on what they saw in Egypt and dancing around the calf. And the Bible is nice in its language because it said they had come down to play around the calf. He's really talking about they were doing some sexual stuff up in there. All around the calf, orgies and all, telling what else was going on up around that calf. And all of this was because they told themselves a story that Egypt was better. And that's why God said, you will not enter into the promised land. The next generation will, but you won't. All because of a story. And you know what? As hard as it is for me to confront some of the stories I've told myself, I want to enter into the promised land. I'm not that wed to my story. I don't want to be like the children of Israel who missed their whole destiny. They missed their whole all because of the story they told themselves. Wouldn't that be jacked up? To get to heaven and realize there was so much more for you. There was so many more blessings for you, but all of it didn't get released over your life, not because of a punishment, because of your story, but because your story had prevented you from moving forward in the way that you were supposed to. Wouldn't that be a sad thing? And so I want to encourage you today to challenge yourself. Where am I stuck in my story? The first thing that you can challenge yourself is get around people who aren't going to affirm it. Now, one of the things that my therapist says is, you fight me at every turn. Maybe so, but I'm listening. I do listen. I might fight, but I'm going to listen. And I might not swallow it whole, but I'm going to listen. But I need it. I don't need everybody around me to have the same opinions. I mean, you could study history and see that's what brought down nations, companies, families. I mean, when everybody just goes along, but it's wrong. Sometimes you need somebody to tell you, I don't think that's right. And even if they're wrong too, at least the challenging of your opinion, because it could be that 3 people have an opinion and all of them are wrong. But the fact that somebody else is willing to challenge your opinion in kindness is enough for you to be able to sit back and say, maybe I could be wrong. Sometimes we don't even broach that possibility because we've told ourselves the story so long and so hard. We don't even broach the possibility. I could be completely and totally wrong. That could just have been the experience I had, and I told myself a lie around the whole thing. All right. So I want to encourage you today. Challenge yourself. Don't get stuck in your story, because I find if you're stuck in your story, you'll get stuck in your place, and you don't want to get stuck there. You have too much inside of you to get stuck there, and it might hurt. And it might be painful. It probably will be, especially if you told the story like I have in some cases for 30 years. I mean, there's some stories I've told myself, I know since I was 4 years old. That was when I was first introduced to some things. And I told myself a story for a long time. And now I'm finally at the place where I can sit back and say, maybe I was wrong. Now, maybe I'm right. I'm still ready to hold on to that. I'm not ready to give it all up. But maybe I'm wrong. And that's the first step to say, God, change me. God, help me to see. God help me to do, and I'm going to get off after this, but there's a scripture I know I always go back to. But the scripture says that on earth we know in part and we prophesy in part, but it won't be until the end that the fullness will be known. And we always take that so deep and spiritual about spiritual things, but sometimes I think that's about natural things. Sometimes we know in part. Okay, so something happened to you and it really did happen, but you know in part because you only know it from your side. You don't see the fullness. You don't really see the fullness. And so part of challenging the story is maybe you have a piece of the truth, but you don't have the whole truth. And asking God to bring people into your lives to help you, to help us to tell a different story, because that's the only way we can truly grow. That's all I have for you. I'm Darrell Bennett. Please share this. No matter what you've done, you already know what I'm going to say. You can come back. Swing it. Have a wonderful day, y'all. If I can turn it off.